A panel of politicians with me now in Brisbane, the Shadow Industry Minister Sophie Mirabella. Thanks for joining us, Sophie, and in Melbourne, the Housing Minister and the Minister for Status of Women, Tanya Plibersek. First to you, Sophie Mirabella, I want to put to you a comment made by Malcolm Fraser this morning, another former PM who's had something to say. He says the coalition is not fit to govern.
Well, I think what we have to do is compare the two most recent Prime Ministers, John Howard and Kevin Rudd, not someone from many decades ago that many voters wouldn't even know, let alone remember, many of our younger voters. And I think the important difference between John Howard's intervention and Kevin Rudd's intervention, and one of the big differences between the two men, is that John Howard actually led from the front, actually engaged and implemented the reforms that put Australia in a position to withstand the worst of the GFC, and the other Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, actually took credit for it. And I think that is the distinction, and that's how history will mark each man's significant contribution to Australia's economic well-being.
Let's get Tanya Plibersek's response to that now. We'll come back to you in a moment. Sophie, first, Tanya.
Well, Sophie's talking about the global financial crisis. It's terrific to finally hear someone from the coalition talking about it, because Australia withstood the global financial crisis based on the actions of the Labor government investing in stimulus. We know that 200,000 jobs at least were protected by our stimulus spending, and the coalition have been absolutely in denial about this. We had Tony Abbott, who didn't even know that New Zealand was in recession, saying we should have gone down the New Zealand path. We would be in recession today if Tony Abbott had been in charge of the economy. And if he can't manage the economy, he can't tell us when they're going to have the budget back in surplus, why would Australians trust him with something as important as managing our economy?
Tanya, let me ask you, though, about this, the Rudd intervention and the Howard intervention. It's ironic, isn't it, that you're relying on the guy that you ousted from the job only, less than 2 months ago?
We're a team and we work as a team, and it's terrific to see Kevin Rudd, as his health improves, campaigning for the re-election of a Labor government. And it shows that he understands, as we all do, what a disaster it would be to have Tony Abbott as the Prime Minister of this country.
But it's been a dysfunctional team, hasn't it? It's been a dysfunctional team lately.
We see on the front page of the Australian today that Tony Abbott's backbenchers are out there, Darren Chester's out there saying that he doesn't believe in paid parental leave, and the National Party are out there and they're saying that they don't believe in paid parental leave. 2 years ago, Tony Abbott didn't believe in paid parental leave. He said paid parental leave over this government's dead body. He's a recent convert, but he can't bring his party with him. If you're talking about dysfunction, how about the central policy commitment of your election campaign, having people in your own party saying that they don't support it, that it's been poorly thought through, that it'll raise the cost of groceries, that it'll increase the costs every time you pick up a shopping basket of food.
Okay, let's get Sophie's response to that. Sophie Mirabella.
I have to really wonder in amazement, Tanya, using the word dysfunction. If you want a definition of political dysfunction, look at the Labor Party. 6 weeks ago, they knifed Kevin Rudd because, as Julie Gillard said, he'd lost his way. Now that Julia, in a few short weeks, herself has lost her way, they've gone back to Kevin Rudd. It is a joke. And let's take a deep breath here. What happened yesterday? Not one boat was turned back, not one new hospital bed emerged, no debt was repaid. It is the same old dysfunctional Labor Party desperately trying to clutch onto power. They weren't talking about the real issues.
Well, what about the real issue? What about the real issue of paid parental leave, though? What about that claim by Tanya Plibersek there? And it's the front page of the Australian. Darren Chester, the member for Gippsland, says it's critical that you recognise the shortage of childcare places in regional areas. His support for the coalition scheme would be contingent upon greater support for stay-at-home mums.
Well, I've travelled the countryside and I've been involved in discussions on this, on our scheme, and it is extremely popular. It is actually answering the needs and concerns.
Don't support it, Sophie.
Tanya, Manners, please. Manners, please. Just let me finish. You've asked me a question, so let me finish. It is extremely popular out there because it's a real scheme. It's not a Mickey Mouse scheme. It's not a scheme that just ticks the boxes to provide some symbolic front, another ploy, another con from the Labor Party. It's real money for real time for working mums, and it's absolutely critical. And as for Darren Chester, I've communicated with him this morning. He actually does support the paid parental leave scheme, and what he is raising concerns about is obviously lack of childcare places. And when the Labor Party squibbed on their promise to build 260 new childcare centres, I'm sure that has great concern. That issue has caused great concern across many communities, including rural and regional Australia. So there are many gaps in Labor's policies. They haven't delivered. They broke that very, very critical promise. And what I do know is we have a real paid parental leave scheme. It's extremely popular, and it's going to be implemented because Tony Abbott, if we are re-elected, Tony Abbott will be leader. He's not going to have someone looking behind his back. We've now got two potential prime ministers in the Labor Party going against one. Tanya Plibersek, yes.
Kieran, we've seen the opening of more than 1,000 new childcare centres. We've increased the childcare tax rebate from 30% to 50%. So the average family is getting about $3,000 a year more for each child that they have in care. And Sophie's talking about their paid parental leave scheme. It does not start for 2 years. Who knows what will happen there? We've got the coalition partners, the National Party, saying that they're going to oppose it should Tony Abbott be elected Prime Minister. There is no guarantee that Australian mums and dads will ever see a cent of paid parental leave under Tony Abbott, whereas our scheme starts on the 1st of January, money in the pockets of Australian mums and dads from the 1st of January.
Tanya, I want to ask you about the comments of John Howard, the other former PM that we've been discussing this morning, those comments that he made last night about the credibility of the government on national security, targeting Julia Gillard specifically over the National Security Committee meetings. And are you worried that the second longest serving PM, there's still a residue of respect there for him within the community, that they'll hear that and say, this mob aren't up to it on national security?
Well, I think people do have respect for John Howard. We've got a great deal of fondness for all our former Prime Ministers, and that's why it's so important. Sophie Mirabella might have forgotten who Malcolm Fraser is, but most Australians know him as a former Prime Minister, and to have him questioning Tony Abbott's fitness to lead is very significant. To have John Hewson saying that his vote's up for grabs and that Tony Abbott hasn't made the case to win his vote is extremely significant. Having Peter Costello saying that Tony Abbott's not fit to manage the economy because he's not interested in economic policy, and having Tony Abbott 2 days ago not being able to tell us when the budget would be back in surplus. These are things that really worry people. The economy is central in this election campaign. We have withstood the global financial crisis because we acted fast, we acted decisively, we protected Australian jobs, and because of that we have weathered the storm better than any comparable economy.
Okay,
that's what people will be deciding on.
Tanya, let's get Sophie's response to that. Sophie Mirabella, on the economy, which we should point out that there is that offer of a debate still. There's no way that Tony Abbott's going to accept that still?
Look, I have to really respond to what Tanya said. If you're talking about the economy, the Labor Party can't even put free fluff in people's roofs without getting a $1 billion bill to fix up the mistake. These people can't run the economy. They inherited a well-run economy, well-regulated, money in the bank. They've squandered all of that. And let's remember, other countries who spent even larger stimulus packages are in trouble. It wasn't the stimulus package. They know, and they don't have the grace and the professionalism to acknowledge previous governments and the efforts they've made to put Australia in the position that it was to withstand the global financial crisis in the way that it did.
It just shows how little Liberals understand about the economy.
Not one policy has the Labor Party provided to convince Australian families and pensioners out there about how it's going to reduce the cost of living. They broke their promise on Grocery Watch and Fuel Watch. They're still borrowing $100 million a day. That's no way to run an economy. People know they can't trust the Labor Party to deliver. All they get is a Labor Party talking about itself, ganging up. They now need two people to have a go at Tony Abbott instead of actually getting together, putting two heads together to come up with decent policy and answers for Australians about how they're going to stop the boats, how they're going to repay the debt, how they're going to stop the spending.
Okay.
All they're doing is panicking about losing
Sophie and Tanya,
let's just talk about
Sophie and Tanya, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut the debate short there. I hope that we've managed that and balanced that out okay, but we're out of time. Appreciate both of your time this morning. Tanya in Melbourne, Sophie in Brisbane. That's all for this edition of AM Agenda. Join us again this afternoon at 12:30 for Lunchtime Agenda. I'm Kieran Gilbert. Thanks for your company.